What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on groundbreaking healthcare innovation. I'm your host, Jeremy Schrand, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive deep into the stories behind medical advancements, featuring insights from global therapeutic experts who are literally changing how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we are not just discussing research, we're highlighting the human stories driving medical progress. Today, we explore the dynamic landscape of clinical trials in the Asia-Pacific region, a hub that's rapidly transforming global drug development. I'm thrilled to be joined by three distinguished CTI leaders: Tim Schroeder, founder and CEO, whose decades of experience have shaped CTI's global footprint; Jaqueline Aguiar, Managing Director of APAC, who brings deep operational expertise across culturally and geographically diverse markets; and Dr. Ludwig Baumann, a global regulatory strategist with hands-on insights into harmonization and innovation in clinical research. Together, we'll dive into the drivers behind Asia-Pacific's growth, from population diversity and regulatory evolution to the region's increasing role in rare disease research and advanced therapies. We'll also discuss the challenges and opportunities of running trials across multiple countries, the impact of decentralized and virtual trials, and how technology and local expertise are shaping the future of clinical development. Whether you're a sponsor, investigator, or simply curious about the future of medicine, this conversation promises a wealth of real-world examples and forward-looking perspectives. Let's dive right into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Jaqueline, Tim, and Ludwig. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
We're going to be talking about the Asia-Pac region in general today. It has become a major hub for clinical trials in the recent years. From your perspective, what are the key drivers behind the growth, and how do they differ from other regions like North America or Europe?
I think in general, what we've seen over the last, say, 20 years or so is more a globalization of pharmaceutical research. And a couple of variables or factors play into that. I would say, first of all, if you're a pharmaceutical or biotechnology company and you're developing a therapy, you're going to look and say, where are the populations that are going to benefit from my therapy? And in general, when you think of common diseases, high blood pressure, cholesterol lowering, breast cancer, those are diseases that are prevalent around the world. There might be different incidents in one place or another, but I think companies looking at that. I think when it comes to from a CTI perspective, we have such a heavy focus on rare disease. We are frequently asked to go to very unique parts of the world because there is a predisposition to the particular disease that has a genetic factor behind it. I think the second thing from a drug development standpoint is, at the end of the day, it's very expensive to develop new therapies. It's very time consuming. And ultimately, to get the return on investment that you're looking for, you really have to think of the global market. So when we think of Asia Pacific, and certainly love to hear Jaqueline and Ludwig add to this, but it is one of the largest population centers in the world. And as such, it continues to move up higher and higher, I think, on the list of sponsors that we work with.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more about this. I think looking about Asia Pacific, we should think about scale, about speed, and also diversity. So if you will see how the countries are growing in participation and looking at population, that is quite high there, and diversity as well. So and what we see also is a maturation of the countries or the infrastructure as well. So it's a very good place to invest in terms of being part of global trials. And I think that Ludwig could provide more color about regulatory as well.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with this. And also from a regulatory perspective, the Asia Pacific region is getting more attractive with better startup timelines and more efficient clinical trial startup and contact. I mean, we see harmonization initiatives like ASEAN, the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations, issuing guidances with the goal to harmonize GCP requirements, clinical trial requirements in general, also technical requirements with due to documentation and also driving mutual recognition between countries. This also makes trials way more, and especially startup, way more efficient in the region and helps making the region more attractive.
Jeremy, I wanted to just circle back to something that Jaqueline pointed out. Whether it was reality or a perception, I think a few decades ago, in addition to Ludwig's comment about maybe the timeliness or lack of timeliness in the regulatory process, I think there was a concern about quality in that region. And I think that's been put to bed. I think at the end of the day, the finest research is done all over the world. It's much less of a where are you, and it's do you have the administrative support? Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the expertise? And do you have the patience to be able to deliver the research? So I think the concerns that may have been there in the past of a pharmaceutical company saying, well, if I go to such and such location for my registration phase 3 study, I run the risk of having some patients not be evaluable, and as such, my drug may not get approved. And I think that, like I said, has been solved in a very, very meaningful way.
Yeah. So, Tim, I have another question for you. CTI has expanded significantly across APAC. What strategic considerations led to this move, and how do you see the region shaping global drug development in the next decade?
Well, I'd love to have Jaqueline's view on this as the managing director for the entire region, and then Ludwig from a global regulatory perspective to be able to weigh in on what he's seeing literally in a real-time, day-to-day basis. But I think for us, as I highlighted before, we have more than 250 pharmaceutical, biotechnology, medical device companies that we're working for at any given time. And they have really expressed a strong interest for us to work on their behalf around the world. And as such, we have a global footprint with employees and team members in 69 countries. And I think if you think about it, CTI started 27 years ago with a North America bent. And very quickly, we started opening offices and hiring people in Europe. We then circled to Latin America. And then more recently, in the last 15 plus years, Asia Pacific became a focus for us. And then most recently, in the last 10 years, the Middle East Africa region. But I think APAC, we can speak to probably a doubling of work for CTI over the last 18 to 24 months. But Jaqueline, you could probably give a lot more color to that than I can.
I think that historically, as an organization, Asia Pacific was always a region that CTI was paying special attention, giving the benchmark on the importance of the region in the global trials because of the diversity. So the way that we are treating the region is to understand how we should expand to support our clients on their strategies, and also be able to eventually support in a non-conventional countries as well. So just to make sure that we can combine the strength of the region in giving access to the population, to our sites, and also to our clients, and incorporating the region in the global trials.
Jeremy, just to highlight the point Jaqueline made with 2 real-life examples in COVID, we had a U.S. biotechnology company who had a partnership with the National University of Singapore. And so we dosed the first patients in the entire world in Singapore rather than larger countries or countries that might be thought of as a bigger commercial opportunity. It was a strategic relationship between the sponsor and the university. CTI was able to fulfill that. And then same sponsor, fast forward a couple of years later, and as they were actually filing a subsequent application for a broader approval, we worked with them in Vietnam. And if I recall correctly, I think there were 30 to 40,000 subjects dosed in Vietnam. And it was a particular arrangement between the Vietnamese government and this U.S. biotechnology company. And CTI was able to be that partner in the middle. I remember particularly that time, there was a high emphasis on what was the safety profile of the subjects receiving this vaccine. And the CTI safety pharmacovigilance team was able to work across these 30 to 40,000 subjects very quickly, be able to assess and analyze the safety and be part of the dossier. And interestingly, that product got approved first in Japan by the PMDA before it was anywhere else in the world. So really good example to Jaqueline's point.
Jaqueline, as the managing director of APAC, what are the biggest operational hurdles you face when running trials across such culturally and geographically diverse markets?
Yes. So I think that the region is evolving. And when we think about Asia Pacific, we think about scale, but we still have some fragmentation in the regulatory process. So we have nuances that we need to go through for each country. And also we cannot ignore the cultural needs and also the communication and the languages that we need to navigate, speaking about Asia Pac as role. But we see also, for instance, Asia Pacific with incredible government efforts an investment in science and digital health as well. And also we see an involvement in the regulatory that I think Ludwig will add more information about this. But as commented before, we still navigate into a fragmented system that somehow adds complexity in the startup and regulatory process. So it's been wonderful to be part of a such evolving region with lots of opportunities for us to support, again, our patient sites and clients to get Asia-Pac into the global programs that we can support with.
So, Ludwig, from your experience, how do sponsors and CROs mitigate risk related to regulatory variability and the evolving guidelines in the APAC countries?
It's right. There is, although we have seen harmonization efforts, or we are seeing good harmonization efforts, there is still remarkable regulatory diversity in the region, between the nations, between the countries, but it is manageable. So for each country is to a certain level enforcing their own requirements on patient safety, data privacy, ethical oversight, and also timelines sometimes are well defined, sometimes they are not so well defined and rather varying, and also with language and documentation requirements we have differences. Now, to manage those hurdles, it's really important to leverage local regulatory intelligence and expertise for a global regulatory strategy at the end. So that means there is no way around having local regulatory and clinical trial experts that know the clinical trial landscape there, that maintain close relationships with regulators in the region, and who also frequently monitor for any regulatory updates, because also regulatory updates sometimes can come quickly. You need to adapt quickly and accommodate to any new requirements and updates, and therefore this is really needed. This allows then also to plan studies and protocols in a way to avoid unnecessary delays then during approval and during startup, and also to reduce hopefully the number of amendments and changes later on. So all this needs to be included in the planning from the early stage planning from the beginning, and there is no way around really having this local expertise in place in those countries.
When you think of the really complex studies that CTI almost always is involved in, advanced therapies, including cell and gene therapy, rare patient populations, and usually critically ill subjects, I think the point he made is so important. Is you want to have really experienced investigators. You want to have research teams that have a comfort level in dealing with this, and great relationships with the regulatory authorities is really paramount.
You kind of spoke earlier, Ludwig, to the idea that the startup times have been accelerating. How does that harmonization help accelerate the startup timelines for those trials?
Yeah, as said, we are seeing harmonization based on ASEAN guidelines. So issuing guidelines for not on a country level, but for the region to align GCP requirements and so on, and also to drive things like mutual recognition. But there are also then important national initiatives, like, for example, Singapore. They have a reliance model where they rely in their decision-making process also on the assessment of other renowned regulators they trust, like FDA, EMA, PMDA, and so on. So this can speed up or makes the whole approval process more efficient, avoids doubling work, and so on. They still make their own decisions, but they also rely on the assessment of other regulators they trust. And also, Australia is very well renowned for their efficient and also timely, efficient clinical trial startup process, where the ethics committee, the HREC, is really driving the scientific and ethical assessment, and TGA, the authority, is rather just notified about the clinical trial, which is the pathway for the vast majority of clinical trials in authority in Australia. And why is this important for the whole region? Because those countries really can be a role model also for other countries in the region. So this can also have an effect across borders for other countries in the APAC region to make the process there more efficient and speed the process up. And because of this, those countries like Singapore, like Korea, like Australia, they can also be entry points then for larger trials into the region.
Tim, you had that great anecdote about COVID-19 and working on that vaccine. How have the idea of decentralized trials and virtual trials gain momentum, and how have they been adopted in the Asia-Pac region post-COVID?
I don't know that this is necessarily an Asia phenomena, but I think during COVID, when literally the world was in lockdown, we learned to do some things that we continue to benefit from today. Like you said, the decentralized trials are a great example of this. Things like remote monitoring. It truly is a small world. Wanted to go back to something that Ludwig just highlighted is there are many reasons why a sponsor chooses a location. And he was highlighting Australia just as one example. And I just wanted to follow up on that while the train of thought is there. We were at Cell and Gene Therapy Conference, a number of us. We met about 40 or so current CTI sponsors or future ones. And I would say a third of them talked to us about wanting to go to China for their research. And also about a third wanted to go to Australia. Very different thought processes, though. The Australia, as Ludwig highlighted, the regulatory process through the CTN and CTX pathways, very desirable from its speed and efficiency. Also, the Australian monetary currency is relatively inexpensive, about 70 cents compared to the US dollar. And at the same time, there's a really significant tax credit from the Australian government that's a true rebate. We have a number of our customers that take advantage of that every quarter. So it's interesting. That's the conversation when you're talking to people about why I want to go to Australia. Many times that's first in man phase 1 studies. As they get into later phase, a little bit different story because the population base, a lot of competition for a smaller number of subjects in Australia. On the other hand, the China conversations, again, different variables or different viewpoints, but for one, incredibly large patient population ultimately for many diseases. Number two, the perception and maybe the reality is the cost of doing research right now in China is significantly less than North America or Europe, for instance. It might be on par to some places, for instance, in Latin America or in Middle East, Africa, for instance, but very different thoughts as to behind the decision as to why they go somewhere. To your question, though, when you think about whatever the reason for going there, we still have to be able to execute trials there. And whether it's a very, very complicated, small first-in-man study or a very, very large pivotal registration study, which Ludwig and Jaqueline are dealing with right now, because about 40% of all CTI studies are pivotal registration studies. They may involve 20, 30, 40 countries. They may involve more than 100 research sites around the world. The issue of things like remote monitoring, the things like using ePro systems are really paramount to being successful. You can't do it the way you used to do it when it was a single country study.
And to that end, you've got these companies that want to do these cell and gene therapies in Australia and China. How prepared are they for cell and gene therapy trials?
I think for the most part, they're prepared. It's, again, when you think of the complex research that CTI participates in, by definition, a segment of the research population of investigators and team members and sites can do it well and want to do it. There's another set that do not do it. So, for instance, we don't do very much in the community research world, especially in the advanced therapy realm. So we're typically working with academic medical centers, and they're very comfortable. If they didn't have experience 5 or 10 years ago, they've trained at other locations, they've gotten the experience, and there's so many trials right now. It's one of those things where if you take a typical university for us, whether it be in Japan or Korea or Australia or Brazil, they might have 10 studies with CTI. So in some ways, we're able to train, we're able to support, we're able to educate any gaps or any inexperience they might have relative to cell and gene therapies.
Ludwig, from a regulatory standpoint, are they good for cell and gene therapy trials?
Yes, I think also from a regulatory perspective, those countries, the region, those countries are very interested also in cell and gene therapy, and it's getting more and more. So therefore, also from a regulatory perspective, most of them are well prepared for cell and gene therapy. Yeah.
You know, Ludwig, you've led some of the most complex regulatory programs. One that comes to mind to me are some of the combo drug device products. Do you have any specific comments or thoughts or concerns when you think of those complicated patient populations, but then you have a complicated regulatory pathway as well?
This requires intensive discussion with the regulators in preparation also, because especially when it then comes to device drug combination or combined use, it's the pathways are still different in the countries, and then the harmonization is probably not as far as for a pure standard drug trial. Yeah. So this requires really good in-depth preparation and also discussion with regulators potentially upfront to get this approved in a smooth way and in an efficient way. So it's doable, but it of course adds quite some level of complexity.
Yes, and I think for specifically for Asia Pacific, what we saw for regulatory is an involvement regarding the communication with the competent authorities. Right now, they are quite flexible with the pre meetings. So we have supported Japan, for instance, and we are approaching how to do this with China for our clients as well. So for advanced therapies, the best way to address, regulatory concerns, startup timelines is to approach the authorities, present the protocol, the program, and that helps a lot in the fast approval process for advanced trials. So there is also an interest for all the countries across Asia Pacific, making them part of global trials. So that's why they are quite open and flexible to have those kind of communication. The hurdle, language. So usually we need to go through having support to make this in local language, but so far it's been quite successful, and it's wonderful to have CTI as part of those kind of involvement for regulatory piece, for advanced trials, part of our leading expertise as CRO supporting the involvement of those countries in Asia as well.
Jaqueline, I wanted to take the conversation a little different direction. Your role, Managing Director, Talent Acquisition and Retention, is critically important. Yeah. Can you speak to what you're seeing currently in the Asia Pacific region relative to competitive landscape, relative to growing your own team, adding to it, things like that?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I think that we can answer in different aspects. But for me right now, being part of Asia is being incredibly rewarding, because it's a possibility to exercise how we should set a strategy at country level. So right now we have many opportunities to explore in a different manner in each country, right? So, but the strategy should be how we can make a consistency in the talents that we have to address the needs of our operations or across, different departments. But we have done this in a learning phase on how to adapt the needs and navigate into different countries, but targeting the consistency of the talents. Yeah. That
Great.
we have.
So let's talk patient recruitment. How do cultural nuances and patient education initiatives influence trial participation in the region?
It's interesting, Jeremy, in my view, and I'm some levels removed from the day-to-day of seeing it, but I think one thing that's unique in Asia is the use of SMOs. We see the terminology SMO used differently around the world, but in Asia, some of the SMOs, and Jaqueline can speak specifically because she's quite active in the day-to-day communications with those SMOs, but they can be critically important to not only just enrollment, but also making sure the patients stay enrolled in the trial and that data quality is paramount, that we're not missing visits, that we don't have important assessments that go by the wayside. I think that's somewhat unique. When we think of SMOs, for instance, from a U.S. perspective, they have a very different impact on studies. But I don't know, Jaqueline, if you want to take that into more detail there.
Yes. So the use of SMOs across Asia Pacific is critical. It's mandatory for some countries like China, and nice to have for Japan, for instance. So that supports not only the access to the patients, but also on the way ensuring that qualified and trained staff will be involved in the project. So, and also it's supported by the institutions as well. And right now we have the vendors to support us for each country. In that way, we can address not only the needs to have SMOs, but also on how to de-risk the quality of the data that we are generating in those countries in an harmonized fashion.
So looking ahead, what single change would regulatory, technology, or culture would most accelerate clinical trial execution in APAC?
I may jump in to start with, Jeremy, and I don't know if I'll take it the direction you were thinking, but one of the things for us is we're seeing many more Chinese companies coming to CTI asking us to work on their behalf. I think I was just last week, the week before, in 2 different meetings. And it's interesting, there is a need in some cases because of the populations that we work in, or because of the view that being able to do your trials, not just in China, but in the US or in Europe, may give them a lead in fundraising, or it may also expose them to some of the leading academic medical centers. I think the technology aspect to me, sometimes can be as simple as how do you engage on a 24/7 clock, which on one hand seems really straightforward, but on the other hand, I can tell you, if somebody always gets shorted, that's one of those things where just the practicalities of a team, a sponsor, and the research sites being spread all over the world can be particularly challenging. I do think taking it to another level, when I think of wearables, implantables, and the use of AI or machine learning, my guess is that Asia will very quickly utilize those in a cutting edge fashion. And we may be around the world following their lead as opposed to leading and having them follow us. So those are just my very simple thoughts on it. But Jaqueline or Ludwig will probably have something much more thoughtful than what I had.
One single change is probably difficult to answer, but of course, from my perspective, it's of course that the harmonization needs to be moved further, that we don't have this diverse regulatory landscape across all those countries. There needs to be more transparency and also more harmonization with due to the processes and so on. Yeah? This is, I think, the most important thing. And the other really important thing is then also infrastructure, right? With view to platforms and so on. This also needs to be developed, at least probably not in each and every. Some countries are more developed in this way and some countries are not, but this also needs to move forward.
Yes, I do agree. I think that it plays an important role for Asia Pacific in many aspects. Communication is one that is being explored a lot. I'm still learning on how it's going to be in the future, but it's going to help in them incorporating them into a global framework for communication. And I see also evolvement even in the infrastructure of the country. So China, we see them with a lot of biotechs evolving in cell and gene therapy. So they are getting prepared for that. But also we see, for instance, Philippines and Malaysia being part of those kind of projects as well. So, and they are non-conventional countries for Asia Pacific, but also evolving and playing an important role in advanced therapies as well. So I see a brilliant future for APAC, for advanced therapies, and it's been great to be part of this journey at CTI as well.
Jaqueline, just to highlight your point, we had a milestone this week, Jeremy, that frequently happens here at CTI, but a drug we had been working on for the last 8 or so years received FDA approval for a very rare disease involving mitochondrial deficiency in a setting called TKT2. I highlight it only because while the first regulatory approval came in the US, the subsequent ones will come around the world, but the patients that were part of this study came from across the globe. And we see that quite frequently, that even in these small patient populations, in a dossier that has less than 50 subjects, the need to be all over the world, including Asia Pacific, is really important. We'll frequently see, for instance, FDA inspectors that are in places like Taiwan or Singapore or Tokyo or places like that in person, actually assessing the site, the data to make sure the quality is of the level they want. So a real life example this week of a drug that got approved, and the entire world played a role in getting this across the finish line.
Yes, and I'd like just to add that the authorities are doing this not only for, they are only inspecting us, the CROs, as well, being part of the framework to get those drugs approved. So, and they are evolving and maturating as regulatory authorities as well.
Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, Tim, Danke, Ludwig. Obrigado.
Yes,
Jaqueline.
perfect. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of a truly insightful discussion. A huge thank you to Tim Schroeder, Jaqueline Aguiar, and Dr. Ludwig Baumann for sharing their expertise and stories, from the strategic expansion of CTI and APAC to the regulatory harmonization efforts and the critical role of local talent and patient engagement in successful trials. As we've heard, the Asia-Pacific region is not only keeping pace with global innovation, but is often setting the standard, embracing new technologies, adapting to regulatory changes, and ensuring that even the rarest patient populations are included in the journey towards new therapies. The future of clinical research is global, collaborative, and more connected than ever. And as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Visit ctifacts.com to learn more about how we can help you with your clinical trials. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep moving medicine forward.